Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to The Post 5, Claustropolitanism. Now, this is the third instalment in our COVID quartet, where we put in place lenses for your consideration about what we've been through and how we enable a future. Now, as you can see, the New Zealand weather beat me this week. Unfortunately, I can't share that beautiful sunrise with you. I'm trapped in the corner of our one-room temporary accommodation. But is there a better place ever in the history of the world to actually talk about claustropolitanism except in the corner of a temporary flat? I think not. Now, this is a special concept. This is a special theory and trope. And it's brand new in many ways. What we are developing in the vlog this week is brand new theory that I hope together we will enable and develop. But as with most concepts and tropes and theories in the history of ideas, it involves dialoguing with the dead. And the death this week is also a pretty personal one as well. So there's a meta functionality to the vlog this week. It asks you to think about yourself and your relationship with knowledge and what you think your legacy may be. But let's start at the beginning. Let's define claustropolitanism. So to go back, I have to investigate the acorn of the concept, Claustropolis. Gee, we're going to have fun this week. Claustropolis. Let's say it together as a family. Now, this concept was developed by the legendary Paul Virilio, and it was extended in his conversations with Sylvain Lottinger. Paul Virilio was a fascinating scholar. He was probably the most unpopular, the most untrendy of all the 1960s French scholars. He was a loner, he was a Christian, and he was a phenomenologist. So I'll leave it up to you to try and work out the relationship between those three states. Now, while Virilio was used very, very badly in the 1990s as simply a scholar of technology, and wow, he was used badly, his most important work, I believe, invokes the investigation of speed and the understanding of crisis and chaos. He was pithy, and his prose was incredibly dense. And in the year 2008, in his book Pure War, what a title, Pure War, Virilio described the movement of the world from a cosmopolis, to a claustropolitan. Wow. Now note the date here, 2008. Once more, as we've seen through this series of vlogs, have you noticed the pivot point is not Brexit, it's not COVID, it's not Trump. It is the global financial crisis. That is the pivot on which our culture changed. And what happened in 2008 and after is that public good became less important than private bailouts. And within months of the global financial crisis, this bizarre collective forgetting of the event emerged. Forgetting what the banks had done to the world, taking ridiculous risks for ridiculous profit. Now, this is what the legendary Andrew Marno has described as casino capitalism. Great book, I recommend it to you. So what this meant is that public health, public education, public libraries paid the stake for the private bailout. And yes, the banks recovered really quickly. The profits returned. The stock market soared. The bankers' bonuses returned once more. But because of a lack of context or explanation of this global toxic environment, it meant that greed and exploitation started to be normalized. And this casino capitalism has continued to shamble along, sort of like a meth-fueled zombie. Love me a zombie, right. Now, Virilio in real time, and that's always the trick, Virilio in real time knew that this was important. Therefore, he argued that we've moved from a cosmopolitan inflection that we know best through, say, multicultural policies and a commitment to diversity, even if it's not real, even if it's just at the level of ideology. But a movement from this respect and caring for diversity to a Claustropolis, where humanity wants to escape, leave the planet, because it's overcrowded, depleted, gridlocked, and yes, corrupt. Now, really powerful Virilio ideas here. Amazing that it emerged in real time. But like so many of Virilio's pithy ideas, he made this statement, made this argument, and then just moved on to write another book and do something else. I always describe Virilio as the Labrador of theorists. So, you know, discover something and it's all terribly exciting and we bark a bit. And then very shortly after, something else emerges, a new smell, and simply the Labrador of theorists moves on to another topic. So, at this point we have Claustropolis, 2008, interesting enough. But now we move to the second scholar of the day that's going to take this concept and move it even further down the road. Now, once more, as with Virilio, I am dialoguing with the dead. So it's a really buoyant vlog this week. And obviously this is a highly personal death, this one, because the scholar who was developing Claustropolis was, of course, Professor Steve Redhead, my late husband. So Steve was very interested in this concept. He knew something was very important there, and he knew it was significant and was starting to develop ideas about it when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And he died 8 months later. Okay, so this concept, though, did appear before his diagnosis. You see it in his writing about end of 2015. Now, Steve added the following attributes, moving it from Claustropolis to Claustropolitanism. That's an important movement. And he also moved it from the context of sort of French intellectual life to, how do we describe it, Northern English pessimism. Okay, so Steve added a lot to the concept. What he argued was claustropolitanism is a state or a tendency, and he utilised Raymond Williams' great phrase, structure of feeling. Wow. So claustropolitanism became a structure of feeling. And what is this feeling? Well, this desire, this imperative to get off the world, leave the planet, but being unable to do so. The desire to run away from reality, but being unable to do so. So what happens is, therefore, the rich are in their gated communities, locked away in an attempt to find safety. Good luck with that. While for the poor, unemployment, underemployment, homelessness means they can't escape even if they wanted to. So claustropolitanism explains what happens to the working class no longer in work, and what happens to the middle class that's locked into digitisation, locked into this globalised, casualised workforce. I've described this as the middle class being re-proletarianised. So we're endlessly clocking in now through the beeping of our mobile phone. Okay, so you may recognise some of these tendencies here. So popular culture in many ways helps us develop this concept or theory, and you can see a lot of the claustropolitan framework emerged through popular culture from 2008. So obviously if you're thinking about Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul in particular, The Tunnel, the legendary Orange is the New Black, The Fall, and of course, appropriately in New Zealand, Top of the Lake. So is there anything more claustropolitan than living in shipping containers at the end of the world? That was the point of Top of the Lake, and of course the end of the world was obviously Aotearoa, New Zealand. But I also wanted to add a post COVID installment here to this popular cultural conversation. This song was released just a month ago and it's called Purple Zone. Big fan, obsessed. It was released by Soft Cell, as in Mark Armand, as in Tenet Love. Ooh, well, that's the metal version, for which I apologise. So the wonderful Soft Cell, and of course the great Jedi Knights of thinking pop, the Pet Shop Boys. So what's the lyric of this song, Purple Zone? Quote, "Let's get out of this life. I'm afraid and alone, paralysed by the purple zone. My time goes so slow and I don't know how this show will end. I'm losing all my feeling emotions, I pretend. So let's get out of this life. I'm afraid and alone, paralysed by the purple zone. All the fleeting moments of beauty. You blinked and they were gone. Now you're sitting here wondering where it all went wrong. Oh yeah." End of quote. So there, dear friends, is claustropolitanism. There it is in one lyric. And of course the video features older people trapped in a flat, just watching themselves dying. Isn't that fantastic? Mark Armand is a server in an ice cream van. Neil Tennant is pulling pints. A young woman spends the entire video day drinking in an alley, and another lass is serving fried food to customers that never actually appear. Yes, so we can see here the desperation, the loneliness, and the pointlessness. So claustropolitanism is a structure of feeling. Not only are our houses being foreclosed, our lives are being foreclosed. The good life has been colonised by the rich and the powerful. There is literally nothing left. So Steve developed this concept through a series of his books, including We've Never Been Postmodern. And he used these books to critique the cosmopolitan sociology of Lasch, of Beck, of Bauman and Urry. Steve loved these scholars, knew them all, had enormous respect for the scholars, as I do. Fantastic scholars. But claustropolitanism critiques the version of sociology that they engage with. I'll tell you why. Because the cosmopolitan sociologists, great scholars that they were, did not have the intellectual tools to understand September 11 or indeed to explore the global financial crisis. They were unable to explain those events. They didn't have the theories or the tools. And therefore we now require new ways of thinking about the state of our world and indeed our place in it. So as you can see, our systems and structures for work, for family, for leisure, for health, for food, for energy security, just to name a few variables at the moment, were already problematic before Brexit, before Trump, and indeed before COVID. But these troubling and indeed catastrophic events, depending on your personal or your political views, revealed really our economic, cultural, social reality. It's like these events buffed away the lies and the nonsense, and we saw life. Therefore, to summon and change a little bit of E.P. Thompson, claustropolitanism was present at its own making. So we have a really workable theory going on here. We can test this. Everything's going well, except that the scholar who was developing this concept got sick and then he died. So in true claustropolitan fashion, Steve kept his illness completely secret until the night of his death when I announced it. I looked after him completely on my own, and we did that. We made those decisions so that he could continue to research and write without the pity and without the intellectual rubbernecking, so his work would be dealt with honestly. And the book that he was writing between his diagnosis and his death was Theoretical Times. And that book is marinated in death and despair and Claustropolitanism. And the great news is he was able to at least hold a copy of that book before his death. So what we're left with is an intellectual stub, a concept sketched by a dying man, which seems incredibly appropriate. And look, we've got shards of theory that have survived from Steve, from blogs, from podcasts, from videos, so marginal media. And of course, from this marginal and marginalised media, we have to think about knowledge creation in a new way. Now, importantly, Steve died years before the arrival of COVID. But what I am sure of, what I know for sure, is there is no better concept or theory in the world to understand what we have been through and how we attempt to both survive and live in our present. So for the final little part of this vlog on claustropolitanism, I want to take this concept for a walk with you. I want to talk about the work that I'm developing from this stub and how we together can do something magical with this concept. Whatever discipline you're in, whatever knowledge system you're interested in, please take it for a walk and see if it is of value. And of course, we're now using claustropolitanism to understand COVID. And if you think about it, is there any better way to understand enforced isolation, masks, shortages, social distancing, and of course, profound sickness and death? Or to quote Soft Cell and the Pet Shop Boys, quote, "Time goes so slow, and we don't know how this show will end." End of quote. So the claustropolitanism that we are developing together is so appropriate to understand our post-COVID future and how we can intervene in it. Claustropolitanism, therefore, is a global condition, but it's not the positive globalization of the cosmopolitan sociologists. So, let's celebrate the free movement of money, free movement of people and ideas. It's not doing that at all. This is a different sort of globalization of borders, of sickness, of xenophobia, of war, of refugees, of infection. The world is dangerous, crowded, greedy, toxic. So we are working in the workplaces at the end of the world. Unemployment, underemployment, casualization, 0-hour contracts, and of course endless restructures. So mobile phones are our new prophylactic to mitigate and mask us from real-time communication, real-time community. Screens mask us from this multi-sensory lived experience, creating a world in miniature and away from long-term commitments. What's happening is we're simply bouncing around ephemeral media. Life is gamified, so we're scrolling through images on Insta rather than reading scholarly monographs. We are trapped in and by the screen. The world is shrinking. We want to get off. We can't. We're trapped. And what are we trapped by? Well, junk mortgages, homelessness, an extraordinary rental crisis, the credit card economy, and hyper excessive consumerism that provides this transitory relief or micro pleasures. The structures that our parents and our grandparents believed they could rely on, family, work, housing, faith structures, all these structures have been zombified. We use the words, those words are still walking, but there's no content in them. They hold no meaning. So experts in this environment are being abused or ignored. Scrolling through tweets has replaced reading books. And we have these nostalgic stories about men and women and family and religion circulating at the same time like it's 1952, right? The left is dominated by identity politics, and the right is dominated by hyper-individualised self-absorption. It seems almost impossible, therefore, to build from me to we, to build from an individual and move to a community. The disconnection from history means that we're living this screened, hyper-individualised, me, consumerist dystopia. That's our reality. So dead assumptions have led us to the end of the world. And the future is foreclosed. Yes, this is one of my more buoyant vlogs. But in many ways, if we can recognise this, if we can understand this claustropolitanism lens, we'll not only be gifted a future, but we'll be able to see our present and change it. So we need to sit in our present, and we need to really understand the consequences of greed and self-absorption. We as scholars, we as citizens, can deploy this claustropolitanism lens to provide a radical reshaping and reframing of our time. Look, we've seen the university sector battered by market forces. These market forces have nothing to do at all with public education, nothing to do at all with high standards of teaching and learning, and the separation of the sciences and the arts, the serious and the trivial, academic and popular culture is used to mask the reality of our lives. So our present is stuffed with death and disease and ignorance. A functional university, therefore, is required to return information literacy to our public debates and to reshape the context in which we are placed. So understand our social, political lives. COVID capitalism lied to us. COVID capitalism lied to us, created this ridiculous tug of war between economic priorities and health priorities. Well, you know what? Dead people don't pay taxes. But by studying the sickness in capitalism and the sickness of capitalism, we can acknowledge the ruthless reality experienced by teachers and academics, our medical and health professionals, our couriers, our remarkable casualized service staff, the entire service sector, these underpaid communities who allowed us to survive through COVID. So these individual underpaid workers particularly allowed us to live through COVID, but they've provided us with a pathway to our future. Because this is a rebuilding, a reconfiguration of caring in capitalism. But it's also about regulation and governance. Our universities were in a really sorry state before COVID. And remember, crises only intensify what already exists. But our claustropolitanism lens demands that we ask, no longer a rhetorical question, I don't think it ever was, but we have to have an answer to the question, what is the public good? What is the public good? We need to embrace this present and understand that the horror and the confusion and the toxicity, that they are productive. We need to discuss rather than assume or rather than marginalised What is knowledge? What is learning? What is teaching? What is research? Answer these questions. Claustropolitanism allows us as scholars, but also all citizens, to realise, and perhaps realise with disgust, repulsion and fear, that the tools in our intellectual kit bag are actually infected. And those tools are infecting us. Think about it. How flexible should an academic be? A couple of weeks ago, I watched a presentation from an Australian Deputy Vice-Chancellor students, and she said the time has come to move from a university to an Uber-versity. A university to an Uber-versity, so now we can slice up knowledge and deliver it to people when the consumers want it. Like pizza. Claustropolitanism instead asks that we understand knowledge in its fullness, in its scope, in its complexity, not a calcification of the humanities and the social sciences cowered back into their traditional disciplines, not the calcification, the tragedy of what is happening to the sciences at the moment, lacking courage. Instead of asking real questions about the value of science, instead there's this displacement onto these crazy proxies, ranking of journals, citation metrics, outrageous open access fees, and of course industry partnerships. The consequences of truncating and indeed endlessly restructuring our organisations means that we currently have a large array of disciplines and methodologies and epistemologies and ontologies that are no longer part of our university system. We now have gaps. We now have gaping holes in our knowledge development in our universities. Zizek, even before COVID, described this era as, quote, the new dark ages, end of quote. The international population, the world, has suffered these mega events. Now, these events in and of themselves are important, but we must not allow what happened to that global financial crisis. Do you remember the active forgetting of the event months after the bailouts occurred? We must not allow that active forgetting to occur again. We need to learn the lessons of COVID, public health, war, poverty. Paul Virilio titled one of his books, The Administration of Fear. Again, a great title. We must not allow fear to be administered. Fear must be addressed. Expertise must be confirmed and respected, and effective public policy developed. And we need to do the difficult work of consensus building through community, connection, communication. If we don't, the consequences will be catastrophic. The libertarians on the left and the right, both, will continue to create this havoc and this chaos and this instability unless their fears are understood, not administered, unless their fears are understood, and a functional, consensus-enabled public policy is summoned with governance and regulatory protocols in place. We have a choice, you know. We have a choice. We can administer fear in Claustropolis, or we can lead with rigour, with evidence, into a future that is not only remembered but understood these catastrophic events in the past. We as academics can be, and often are, complicit in neoliberalism. We place too much attention on economic value and individual choice, rather than governance and regulation. But we've got a choice. We can stand for something. We can stand for a new research ethics and be part of a project to return meaning and purpose to higher education. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.